You know, some stories about justice wrap up pretty quickly, but this one is different. It's a story that unfolds quietly, patiently, over decades. We're talking about a 34-year search for a killer who was basically hiding in plain sight, and for the names of the women he took.
And the killer's story, well, it didn't end with some big dramatic standoff. Nope, it ended in a Tennessee hospital bed. The man, a long-haul trucker named Clark Perry Baldwin, already a convicted murderer, died from what was reported as a heart attack. Just like that, his long ride was over.
But here's the thing. Baldwin's death wasn't really just an end. For the families of the people he hurt, it was more like the final, really complicated chapter in a story that started a long, long time ago, out on some of America's loneliest highways. So to really get what happened in 2025, we've got to go back, way back. We're talking about a time before we had DNA databases, before forensic genealogy was even a thing. We're going back to a series of awful crimes that, at the time, seemed like they had nothing to do with each other.
Okay, so let's start here. Spring Hill, Tennessee, right off Interstate 65. It's March 10th, 1991. Just a cool day when someone walking by stumbled upon something just devastating. They found the body of a 33-year-old woman named Pamela Rose Aldridge McCall. And what's truly heartbreaking is that she was 5 months pregnant. The cause of death? Strangulation. Now, the investigators at the time, they couldn't have known this, but they had just collected the single most important piece of evidence in the whole case, the killer's DNA. It was recovered from her clothing, preserved, cataloged, and then it just sat there, waiting for nearly 30 years for science to finally catch up.
And right around this same time, something really chilling happened. Clark Perry Baldwin's ex-wife, she later told investigators that he had actually bragged about killing a girl out west by strangulation and throwing her out of his truck. It was basically a confession, right there, hiding in plain sight. But with no other evidence, no context. It was just a terrible story. So, fast forward to the next year. The pattern starts to repeat itself, but this time it's hundreds of miles away, out in the huge, wide-open spaces of Wyoming. We're on I-80 now, in Sweetwater County. This is one of the most desolate stretches of highway in the whole country. Another trucker pulls over near a place called the Bitter Creek Turnout, and he finds something that would no doubt haunt him for the rest of his life. It was the body of a young woman, left completely nude out in the harsh Wyoming winter. The violence was just extreme. She'd been sexually assaulted and had died from massive trauma to her face and neck. And with no ID, no clues to who she was, she just got a nickname, Bitter Creek Betty. Her real name wouldn't be known for 30 long years. And then, believe it or not, just a little over a month after that, we go further north in Wyoming, this time to Sheridan County, along Interstate 90. Some highway workers are doing their job and they stumble upon another victim, just discarded in a ditch.
Just like Pamela McCall back in Tennessee, this woman, this Jane Doe, was also pregnant. She'd been beaten and strangled. Her body was partially mummified, meaning it had been there for a while. She became known as the I-90 Jane Doe, and her identity, her entire story, would be lost for even longer than Bitter Creek Betty's, a staggering 33 years.
So let's just pause here for a second. We've got 3 women, found in 3 different states, all near major interstates, all victims of just horrific violence. But you have to remember, this is the early 90s. There are no national DNA databases, none of the tech we have today, so these cases just stay as separate investigations, isolated tragedies. And that huge question, are these connected? Well, it would go unanswered for decades. And that's when the long silence began. The case files for Pamela McCall, for Bitter Creek Betty, for the I-90 Jane Doe, they just gathered dust. A killer was out there, free, and 2 women had been completely erased, their names unknown even to the very detectives trying to find justice for them. 28 years. For 28 years, nothing. No major breaks, no new leads to speak of. It really seemed like these cases were just going to be cold forever. But then science changed absolutely everything. The big turning point came from this revolutionary new technique, one that could finally give a voice to that piece of forensic evidence that had been sitting silently in a file for decades. It's called forensic genealogy, and it's pretty amazing how it works. Basically, investigators can take an unknown DNA profile, like the one from the crime scenes, and upload it to public genealogy databases. This helps them find distant relatives, like third or fourth cousins. And from there, they start building out family trees, piece by piece, slowly narrowing down all the possibilities, until, eventually, they can land on a single person. So the process here was this incredible mix of cutting-edge science and just good old-fashioned police work. Step 1. They confirmed that the DNA from all 3 crime scenes belonged to the same unknown man. Step 2. Using that forensic genealogy, they built out that family tree, and it pointed straight to one guy, Clark Perry Baldwin. But they needed his DNA to be sure. So, step 3, classic surveillance. They tailed him to a Walmart, and when he was done shopping, they collected his DNA from the shopping cart he'd used. The lab ran the test, and it was a direct match. On May 6, 2020, they finally arrested him.
Okay, so now the suspect is in custody. The long overdue process of getting some answers, some reckoning, could finally start. And maybe most importantly, those 2 Jane Does could finally get their names back.
So in May of 2025, Baldwin went on trial in Tennessee. A jury found him guilty of murdering Pamela McCall and her unborn child. He was sentenced to life in prison. And just like that, the first case, after 34 years, was officially closed.
But really, the most profound thing to come out of all of this was restoring the identities of those 2 women. Thanks to that same DNA technology, Bitter Creek Betty finally had her name back, Irene Vasquez, and the I-90 Jane Doe was identified as a 21-year-old named Cindy Arlene Estrada. After more than 30 years of just being numbers in a cold case file, they were people again. They had families who could finally, properly mourn them.
Now, with Baldwin convicted down in Tennessee, Wyoming was next in line. They were all set to extradite him so he could stand trial for the murders of Irene and Cindy. But, as it turns out, time just ran out.
And this final part of the story happened so fast. On July 17, 2025, the authorities in Wyoming made the official announcement they had identified Cindy Estrada. And then, just one day later, Clark Perry Baldwin was dead.
And that's the crucial point here. While these cases were technically solved, they had their guy, he was in prison, he never actually answered for what he did in Wyoming. The families of Irene Vasquez and Cindy Estrada, they would never get to see him face a jury for those crimes. They'd never get their day in court.
So it all leaves us with a really tough question, right? When a search that lasted 34 years ends like this, with names finally restored but the killer silenced by his own death instead of a verdict, what does justice actually look like? Yeah, there was a conviction, yeah, there were identifications, but it's also the story of 2 trials that will now never, ever happen.